I think one of the big things that's now becoming a very important decision. I'm sure Alan has comment on this, but it's also deciding when to do 3D. You know, for example, the retrofit 3D that's been applied to Clash of the Titans, Tim Burton's film. You know, you get a sense that it's sort of an applied filter that's put on after the fact. There's nothing like actually shooting in 3D on set, seeing it happen, seeing it on the big monitors. You know, so I think the decision of if you are going to do a 3D film, when you introduce that 3D element is really, really critical.
I think the whole thing about 3D is it's like anything, it's sound or colour, it has to be used as part of the palette of what the director and what the story is trying to do, and if it's done wisely, then it works. If it's just slapped in as a sort of money-making exercise, then you know it's not going to deliver. So it is a creative choice about whether it's the right thing to do.
It begins as early as pre-production, or even at script stage, really. I mean, what we do with our storybooks now is coming in, more or less at storyboard stage, and creating depth scripts, and that's sort of looking at the script across the whole film, getting the vision for a second, look at the emotions, what the director and the DOP are trying to achieve in a scene or a shot, and sort of look at how the 3D content throughout the whole film. So obviously certain moments you want to highlight the 3D, other moments need to be sort of more shallow, more calm, and then what's the audience sort of feeling as they're going there? You obviously can't go high the whole time, and have eye strain, and you feel sort of bored with the 3D or sick. So we think about using it intelligently.
I mean, we use in the Fly Machine. We use 3D basically to heighten the moments when we're in the fantasy world of the story, and that because this story takes place in both a real world and basically for those that don't know about the film, it's all set to music of Chopin. It's a stop frame film with live action. And we actually use 3D to heighten the moments of fantasy. So you know that sort of subtle application of 3D. I think is going to, as Alan says, is going to grow. It's organic, it's evolutionary. We're in the nascent stages of the technology, and you know, it's not a binary state. You know, it's not that there is a 2D world and a 3D world. It just happens to be that there is a new technology that we, as producers and exhibitors, learning how best to use. You know.
I was going to say, when we were watching all these rushes in 3D, as soon as we cut back to a 2D image, it looked flat. It just absolutely flat. And what I'm obsessed by is how, you know, if there's your 2D image and there's your 3D image out here and it pops out and it still looks like a gimmick, how can you meld the 2D and 3D so it doesn't feel like a gimmick but is not a 2D image? You know, it's some evolution of the 2D image to create more depth without gimmick. And I think that'll happen, you know, I really do. I think that we can, it's a little bit like shooting on long lenses. The image has more depth than shooting on a wide-angle lens, for example, you know? So how can we use 3D as a tool to make the film experience richer? And I'm sure Tarkovsky or Kubrick, or these guys would be looking at 3D. I'd love to see a 3D landscape art film, you know? I'd love to see that.
Well, obviously Scorsese's making his first 3D.
Exactly. And David Finch is looking at that. I mean, you know, it is absolutely another piece of imagination that technically that directors can use, and they're going to use it. All the great directors will use it because it is not a gimmick, you know. And I think the idea was at first that it was a gimmick, and it absolutely is not a gimmick. It's just another tool for them to use.
I mean, it's quite an altruistic view that we're all sharing at the moment, which is that everyone can join in on 3D. I mean, you know, let's not beat about the bush. There's only so many films that can afford to be shot in 3D.
And only so many screens to fit them on when they are ready.
I mean, the thing is you know, I come from a first AD background. Actually, used to work for Alan a number of years ago, and you know, I feel the pain when I'm on a 3D set and it's taking the camera crew 45 minutes to swing a lens. You know, and I can see the day dripping away from us, that it becomes painful. So I'm sure all the greats will get to use it, but that's because they can command the budgets that can afford to negate the very big impact that shooting 3D has on a production schedule and budget.
This is changing very, very rapidly. With the Epic cameras that we're using on Jake the Giant Killer, we're going to be using zoom, so that's as a variable prime, and that starts to get rid of this whole idea of this 45-minute lens change. Now, 6 months ago, that wasn't an option. For Horror Henry, we used a completely different camera setup. If we shot that today, we'd use different cameras, be much smaller, more compact, and all the things that you're not worried about.
I understand that. When the other technologies came in that we've talked about, sound, colour, and all the rest of it. At the early stages, it was expensive, and it sort of got cheaper and cheaper as it goes. But you can't get away from the fact that it does take you longer to shoot a 3D movie than it does being on set and shooting something 2D. The issue that we had with the Flying Machine is that we had live action that was shot dual camera through a mirror rig, and then on the animation we were actually having to shoot 8 frames per frame of animation. Now, anyone that's done any stop frame or been associated with stop frame knows that it takes fucking age to get anything done anyway. So then when you're slowing up the animators by telling them that they've got to bracket the exposure, we're actually on that shooting single camera and animating the convergence, so for every frame of animation there's 8 exposures taken, and it does slow things up, which is, I think, helps in our decision making, because then when you want to make a 3D film, you really want to make a 3D film, and you have to get behind it.
But do we think that the technology in coming years, maybe Adam, you're the best person to answer this one, is going to be more affordable, that we're going to be seeing more indie filmmakers be able to afford some 3D elements?
Yeah, absolutely. 12 months ago, we wouldn't be looking at projects anything less than £5 million sterling as a suggestion, because that's the number one question I get asked is, like, how much extra does it cost, that sort of thing.
That's the extra.
No. I mean, feasibly speaking, and it's difficult because what I'm looking at is just the camera side. I've got no say on the casting or the locations on the set design. So, but several projects, the budgets are sort of around £3 million sterling, with cameras like the Epics coming through, with the post-production process being more streamlined, can feasibly look at it. And there's a lot of things to look at, and the main thing is planning, just to make sure you know where you're going into the shoot. You probably really can't have a director turn up in the day, sort of decide what they want, because there's so many knock-on effects, and that's what will take the time. But that's within 12 months, and I mean, I think it'll sort of plateau.
Sorry.
But for anyone that's in the room that's thinking of shooting a 3D movie, take your budget and add 30%. Seriously, 30%. And I did that on the Flying Machine. I line produced that picture and I got it wrong. The amount of time and the extra labour. We're just talking about shooting the thing. What we haven't touched on is post. The post, and when you're trying to create an image in 3D that looks as beautiful as you can get it. I'm not being negative about 3D. Love the stuff and it works, but please go in with eyes wide open. 30 to 35% on your budget.
And what would you say on time? Added time for your...
Same, that's cumulative. I mean, that's both direct cost and also time lost.
Also wanted to talk about maybe educating writers and directors at an earlier stage, and how, if I was going to write a script, I could probably go do that. If I was going to write a script that had to have some 3D elements, I would have no idea. So how does the industry need to educate people coming up now to start thinking about 3D smartly from the very first stages?
I'm not sure if it really affects the scripting, because I think at the end of the day 3D should be assisting the characters in the plot. And I mean, if you're writing a page that is the 3D moment, the audience will definitely pick up that you've taken away from the story and the characters. It should all be very integrated. So I think it's pretty unlikely that... I think if you're writing scripts with, then it just pops out of the screen, and you're probably missing the point, really, because 3D is meant to be all integrated, mentioned in the same way the colour and the sound is. The storyboarding, again, with respect to edge violations and the way you're framing it. And then we use devices like GetScript, which is much more literal in terms of the foreground objects, the background objects, because 3D storyboards, a lot of previews for a real return.
I think the big education comes not at script stage, but at the director.
Absolutely.
On the producer, we start worrying about the cash before it all starts. But for those of you who haven't maybe shot 3D, there's certain things you just can't do. Sergio Leone would be fucked by 3D, because you can't go from a big master wide and punch into 2 pairs of eyes in an extreme close-up. You have everyone thrown up in the theatre. So there is, in terms of an education, the camera side of it. Camera boys love 3D. It gives them an excuse to hang about on set a little bit longer. Me and Alan have been trying to drive camera crews to get quicker and quicker over the years. Now they've got an excuse. But it's more at the point of the sort of the directing. You're saying edge violations. Crashing in on a tight close-up from a big wide is something that will throw the eyes. But it's the education of the director rather than the scriptwriter necessarily.
And I think we were saying before, I can not think of many female directors who've tried 3D yet. Dania, who directed, or was co-director of Street Dance, is the one we came up with. But you know, it seems like it's sort of a boys' world at the moment, and maybe that's
But
something.
it is anyway in film
Well,
directing. Come on, Wendy!
Sorry, I did sign up for this. Is that a political argument?
Part 2 of the panel will be
I can see
feminism and film.
Oh, you should see the boys hang around with 3D cameras. Oh, the smiles on their faces. Toys for the boys.
Going back to a more serious note, it seems like a big change this year in 3D, because in Berlin we saw Wim Wenders doing Pina in 3D and Herzog with Cave, and it was the first real crop of sort of art house type films to use the technology and be embraced for it and show a sort of non-avatar way of using it. And I was just curious if you think we're going to see a lot more of that, or if most indie films, or I don't want to see the King's Speech in 3D, no offense, I don't want to see the Dardenne Brothers in 3D. So, which kinds of independent films do we think we're going to be seeing more in 3D?
I think we might see the Dardenne Brothers doing 3D. I genuinely do. I mean, I think people, once they start to see Pinas and Cave and, you know, the Scorsese, and even use street dance, you know, if I was an art house director and saw what fun you could have, I would be out there saying, if I was a 25-year-old director or even a 7, you know, bring it on, Ken Loach, let's see him have a go. I genuinely think that people, I mean, Herzog, because he did, we were having a conversation about it, and he said, you know, he wasn't a fan of 3D, but the fact was the caves he went in there with the cameras that he put together, and he thought, well, these caves may be at some point shut, and if I don't have a record of them, and this is the best way to make a record of them. So it's a choice that the director makes to make a better film, or a film that fits the subject that they want to do. So I do think that indie directors will be out there saying, this is another tool for me.
I think it's important that we, you know, commercialism isn't a bad and dirty word to share, you know, and we start to get these over-intellectualised debates about to 3D or not 3D, you know, and it's great that some people like that are sort of championing the cause, but, you know, whatever the reason why people may decide to shoot a film 3D or 2D, it has to be driven by story. You know, it has to be, you know, we've never considered King's Speech as a 3D movie, and I have two period films in development that I probably wouldn't think 3D for those also. But we do have a kids' drama that I'd love to do in 3D because it's a real roller coaster type story. It's all based around Father Christmas and being out on the night when he's delivering the presents. And I want to be with my 6-year-old goddaughter again in a theatre where she gets to go on that ride. So that sort of roller coaster element, I think, is an important one.
In terms of period films, you've got Great Gatsby, which is going to start shooting soon, and that's going to be amazing. The way that 3D will really create the world of opulence and the world we're living in, and really, it can be used to sort of make that world feel very confined, but it's also, you know, giving a lot of detail to all the props and the lifestyle. But again, I guess the roller coaster.
When I was at the world premiere of Hubble 3D in Houston, you know, and it was in a giant IMAX screen and 3D, and it was just it is literally the most amazing cinema experience I've ever had, you know, to travel through space and be so immersed in that film. And that's what we're talking about here, is trying to evolve cinema to a more immersive experience. And why shouldn't that be a war film or an action film or an adventure film or a kids film? You know, we're still, as I said before, we're still in our infancy. It'll evolve, and I'd love every film I ever see it to be an IMAX giant screen 3D immersed in the experience. And you know, that's what it's that convergence between game and cinema. You know, it'll evolve there, I think, as well. You know, that it will be almost in the movie. You know, it's got to evolve somewhere.
I mean, one of the sort of like, when people come at you as a producer in terms of sort of 3D and it's a gimmick, it's that, and you know, they say, oh, you shouldn't be doing 3D movies and all that. I say, well, okay, fine. Next time you're walking down the street, close your eyes, because you see the world in 3D. That's what stops us falling over. Okay, we have perception of depth. That's how we get through life. And so when people are going, oh, 3D, it's like, well, that's actually how we see the world. So if we can get that up on a big screen and entertain people and draw them into the theatres, then that's us honouring our responsibilities as producers.
And I think the whole thing about cinema is it's a visual experience. This is what we're doing. It's not books, for Christ's sake. So cinema is about it's about the screen. It's about seeing things, and so what are we doing if we don't use it? It's madness.